Okay, so hi everyone. Thanks for being here. So I'm very glad that we're all together in this diiP Projects Day. So today we're going to hear about the projects that have been running this year by diiP. And we will also get to hear about some of the diiP projects. So these are the PhD fellowships that have been supported by diiP in these last years. So without further ado, let me welcome Professor Nikos Paragios, who is our first keynote speaker. So Professor Paragios is a very distinguished professor and scientist. He's a distinguished professor of mathematics at École Centrale Supélec. He's also the executive officer, the chief executive officer of Thera Panacea. This is a startup that he co-founded. And part of his work that he will talk about today are topics that they are working in this company. Professor Paragios has been a fellow of the Institut Universitaire de France, which is a prestigious distinction across all disciplines.
That's okay.
He's been affiliated with Siemens USA in the past, being an adjunct or visiting professor at Rutgers, NYU, and the University of Houston. So he has received several awards, including from IBM, also from the European Research Council. And I'm very happy that he's here with us today to talk to us about his work related to healthcare and AI.
Okay, good. Good morning, how are you? Good, okay. So first of all, thanks for being here at 9:30, when it's so late. So as I would like to thank Themis for the kind invitation. And today I'm going to talk to you about mostly the work that my PhD students have been doing, which is related with healthcare, but is not related necessarily with the company. This is my conflicts of interest, so I can skip that. Okay. So the first thing actually what I would like to do is actually I would like to define what means healthcare. There is a problem with the fonts. I don't know if it's me or it's the copy.
Was it from a Mac?
Yeah, no, it was from a laptop. No, should I use my laptop or we can stick with that? Because the point is that you are missing. Can I stick my computer?
We'll try. Can we try?
Yeah.
So excuse me, we'll have to change laptops because there's a problem with the phones.
If there's room.
Let me pause it.
Sorry about that. Can you see me online? Can you see the slides online? Yes? Okay, I can see some thumbs up. Okay, so first, I would like to thank the Themis for the invitation. Today, I'm going to talk about the work that actually my PhD students have been doing. And it's mostly around the use of machine learning, deep learning, a little bit of Gen AI in the area of healthcare. So, should be able to change slides, otherwise it's going to be complicated. Okay, so I will start by defining what we mean by AI in healthcare, or what physicians at least understand. There are three definitions in healthcare. The first definition is straightforward. You discuss with the physicians, you understand the problem, you understand the logic. Once you have done that, then what you are doing is you are writing a program which actually reproduces the logic of the physician. This is mostly what we usually refer to the notion of symbolic AI. Nothing exciting, you just try to reproduce human behavior by understanding the task. This works pretty well when you're looking into very simple tasks, which actually consist of a series of questions which can lead you to the definition of the outcome. But when you start looking into more complex tasks, then actually even understanding the physician has become complex. And even if you understand the physician, actually writing down the logic is not that trivial, because physicians usually they do different things for the same purpose. The second definition of AI is actually, instead of trying to understand human intelligence, what you like to do is you like to reproduce human behavior with respect to the task. And this is actually what is used today. You're going to get an annotated data set, which has whatever task is there. It can be detection of cancer, it can be segmentation of organs, it can be any imaginable task you have. You have a database, you have the ground truth. The idea is to build a system which actually will replicate exactly the behavior of the human with respect to the task. You don't try to reproduce or mimic human intelligence. What you would like to do is just have a system that has approximately the same performance and the same behavior with respect to the objective. And this is mostly what is used today thanks to deep learning. The third definition of AI, which is the most interesting, and this is where I'm going to focus today, is actually going beyond humans. Actually try to understand, that means use the data the way you have them and try to relate invisible to the human eye information with respect to an objective, which actually humans cannot do. A typical example can be predicting outcomes. So you have a number of patients that have been treated with whatever drug you like. Some of them are responding, some of them are not responding, and normally all of them should have responded to the treatment. So what you would like to do is you would like to figure out if there is a way of phenotyping the patient from the early stage, try to look on this data before initiating the treatment, and if this information can help you to predict what will be the outcome. So today we're going to focus mostly on things that humans cannot do, and this is not because we are not smart, it's because our brain is not actually built in such a way. Okay, first, why this is happening now? Well, there is a very simple reason. I mean, if we look on the landscape of healthcare, actually there are three areas where AI is making a big difference. The first area is what we call diagnosis. Instead of using physicians, actually what you are doing is you are pushing data to a software. The software has been trained, and actually once the software has been trained, it can do the same thing for the physicians. This can work for images, this can work for blood tests, this can work for genetic tests, and there is a plethora of applications. There is a number of actually nature papers that were published on why AI, when we have sufficient amount of data, is usually doing better than an average physician. That's one thing. This actually what helps you is automation. It brings to the hospital things that actually you can do easily at no cost once you have access to the software. And it helps you standardize practices because any AI solution will be able to see more data than any physician. Okay, but the added value with respect to the patient is limited because still humans are able to do very good job on diagnosis. The second domain where AI is making a big difference, actually, it's not instead of looking on diagnosis, what you would like to do is you would like to use software, you would like to use methods that will help you to treat the patient. So that means now the software is not just there to assist the physician on making a decision. Actually, the software is helping to implement treatment. Typical examples are neurosurgery, robotic surgery, interventional radiology. And then you have actually live guidance from software that was built based on training data and tell to physician where to focus. Now we are changing completely the dynamics because instead of only looking on what is the disease of the patient, we actually help to cure. And the third area where AI is making a big difference is actually on what we call drug development and prognosis. The idea is to synthesize data, to synthesize molecules, to synthesize drugs, and then try to imagine among all these possible scenarios, which drug is most likely to answer to the question you are trying to follow. Before actually using AI, what people were doing is we were doing things on the chemistry lab. So you're synthesizing molecules and then you test them on mice. But you can imagine that there is an exponential number of potential combinations of molecules. So when you are in the chemistry lab, the number of actually combinations you can test is very small. AI is helping to identify what's the most prominent targets, and then you can go there. Why AI is becoming a hype today? Actually, this is not new. It's almost about 10 years. Actually, technology hasn't changed that much. I don't think as mathematicians, we're going to be extremely proud of the mathematical foundations of deep learning. I mean, there is something that is very standard, which is backpropagation. And the famous, you do a chain rule of a gradient, and then that's what you're using. But mathematically speaking, there is not that much that has changed since the last century. What has changed actually in the healthcare is that you have more data, and this is a slide that you can find almost everywhere on the web. You have more computing power, okay, which means that actually you can train more complex. So I think most of the intelligence today relies on actually building smart models, but actually this would not be possible if we didn't have access to the data and we didn't have an exponential growth of the computing power over the past 2 decades. That's what has changed. So once I have done the introduction, let's now try to talk about concrete problems and why this is actually a game changer in healthcare. So this is the work of Amaury Leroy. He was a PhD student at Gustave Roussy, Centrale Supélec, and at Lyon Bérard from École Polytechnique and has graduated 6 months ago. So when you are having a problem in healthcare, especially in oncology, usually the most common way of identifying cancer is to do imaging. We're going to do a CT scan, we're going to do an MR scan, and then we're going to look where is the tumor, and then based on that, we're going to decide what we'll do. The principle of a CT scan is actually you're irradiating the patient, you are getting projections, you are inversing the measurement, and that's how you are getting a CT scan, which is what you are seeing on the left-hand side. However, the only thing you are seeing there is anatomy. The golden standard in oncology is what we call digital pathology. So ideally, what you would like to do is you would like to actually open the patient, cut the tumor, take the tumor out, put it on a microscope, look on the tumor, understand what you have to do, and then put it back and treat it. That's usually how it works. However, this is not possible, right? It means there's no way you can get the tumor out, do the biopsy, put it back, and then treat it. So, but the ground truth, the understanding of the tumor is actually on looking on pathology. And this is the images that you are seeing on the left-hand side. These are high-resolution images at the micro scale, where actually you can almost see at the cell level. But they are not available. And the only way to get them is by doing a surgery, by removing the specimen, and by looking into the microscope. So Amory's thesis was actually the objective was, is there a way of going from a CT scan, which is a low resolution macro representation of the patient, and try to guess how a digital pathology will look like for the same patient? So we'd like to develop a solution which allow you to do a virtual biopsy. Okay, so here is the objective. The idea is to actually build a cohort of actually patients for which we have a CT scan. This is a 3D representation of the patient. For these patients, what we did a complete surgery. So that means that we remove the tumor and the surrounding area. And this is usually what is happening in areas like prostate and larynx. And what we like to do is we like to use this pair of data between CT scans and digital pathology and try to develop a system which will be able to synthesize how a virtual digital pathology will look like by only using CT scans. So what you are seeing on the top is actually what is the input. What you are seeing on the bottom is actually what we like to achieve. We like to be able to synthesize, generate from a CT scan that is publicly available, that is non-invasive, that is accessible to almost everybody, an image that will look like how I would have seen the tumor if I was able to extract it and put it on the microscope. Why this is complicated? First of all, there is a huge gap on the resolution. CT scans, usually we are looking about to 1 millimeter cube resolution if we are happy. When you are looking into digital pathology, you are almost on micro resolution. That means that you have to deal with a huge loss of information between digital pathology and CT scans. The second problem is that when you are doing a surgery or when you're removing part of the human tissue from the body, there is what we call tissue collapse. That means that a tumor is surrounded by healthy tissue, so actually it's constrained. When you take it out, automatically there's nothing constraining the position, so it will collapse. So even if you are able to extract the specimen from the patient, when you put it on the microscope, it does not correspond anymore to the anatomy that was corresponding when it was part of the body. So you have to deal what we call actually plane plus deformation. That means that the position is changing because you are taking it out. And even the tissue will collapse itself. So even if you are able to slice it with a very good precision, still you're not going to be able to see exactly the same things that you were able to see when you're looking at the CT scan. So it's what we call a nil-post problem because it's really hard to get correspondences. It's really hard to associate the resolution because you're going from almost millimeters to microns. And then you don't have sufficient data because there are not that many patients for which you can operate the surgery. So the work of Amory was the following. Is there a way first that I can try to imagine a scenario where the first objective I would like to address is to be able to create correspondences between digital pathology and CT scans. What are the challenges? The challenges is what I mentioned before. You have to be concerned that human, when there's on the CT scan is lying on a bed, everything is perfect. When you take the surgery, you put the specimen on the microscope, there is no correspondence, there is no correlation, there is nothing to do with the way the specimen was when it was in the patient. So I have to first address the problem of rigid alignment. I have to bring the specimen back to the patient reference space. And then I have to worry about what we call tissue collapse, which means that even if I have perfect alignment on the tissue globally, the tissue has changed because of the surgery. So what was the idea of Amory? I mean, what we said is that you have to build something that allows you to solve 3 problems at the same time. The first problem, ideally, the objective is to synthesize from a CT scan a digital pathology. Okay, this is a very complex problem. We don't have enough data, and it's an ill-posed problem. Okay, so what we like to do is we like to do 3 things at the same time. The first thing we like to do is actually find a transformation which will allow us to align in the most efficient way both the global transformation and the local displacement of the tissue with a CT scan. The second thing we like to do is we like to be able to synthesize, that means we like to train a network which will take as input the CT scan and synthesize the digital pathology. And the third thing we like to do is we like to be able to minimize the distance between what the actual observation is of the digital pathology and what we are synthesizing. So in simple words, you are pushing to the system a CT scan, you are pushing to the system the corresponding surgery, and the system should be able to provide you the exact correspondence between the two, the image that you can synthesize from the CT scan to the digital pathology, and the distance between these two things, it should be as small as possible. That was the idea. This is a very tough problem. Just to give you an example between how things will work. So on the top row, you see actually the correspondences before and after registration. As you can see today, the tissue itself is not sufficient to constrain the problem. And the reason why the tissue is not sufficient to constrain the problem is because, as I said before, when you take it out, you have the collapse notion. So we're going to introduce additional constraints that refer to what we call rigid anatomy. So bone structures are not changing. So we're going to use whatever is rigid to constrain your problem, such that you are getting a deformation which at least maps things that you know where they're supposed to map, because you don't have a ground truth. So we train a 3-layer deep learning network, which actually does 3 things. The first was to register, and the results of the registration are seen here. So what is changing from between the 2 videos is the input and then the deformed image. The deformed image that you are seeing, the second image, corresponds to the result that actually will generate a CT that is as close as possible to the biopsy. So that means the 2 images, the second image, you should be able to see that it comes very closer to where it's supposed to be with respect to the virtual biopsy. Of course, we have used different methods to actually measure how well we are registering things. And one of the things that people are using is what we call a dice coefficient. The idea is to look on overlap between registration after and before. And when you are using the constraint of actually bone structures, you are able to get a dice coefficient, which is about 87%, which is surprisingly high. The reason why we need to do that is because we need to have correspondences to train models. If we don't have correspondences, if we don't know which signal aligns to what signal, then it's going to be really complicated to make things happen. Okay. Once you have done that, then now what we can do is you can focus on the next step, which consists of transforming the information from the digital pathology to the CT scans. As I said before, everything is visible and everything is well defined when you are looking into the microscope. So what we ask the physician to do is actually to spend time to annotate what we are looking for in digital pathology. And then the idea was to use this framework, to use this ground truth and bring it back to the CT scans where the ground truth is not available, and then use this information to train models. This is what you are seeing here, actually. The model that corresponds, you can see 3 different colors. There is a color that corresponds to the ground truth that is transferred from digital pathology to the CT scan. There is a model that actually corresponds to what the physicians would have done, and this is the yellow color. So the yellow color, the physicians, if they had no access to any information, and that's what they would have used, they would have denuded the tumor with a yellow color. And then you can see with the orange color is what we have been doing automatically by learning this framework. What is important to mention is that today, physicians, they are not that good. We did a study between 2 of the leading hospitals in France, and this is Gustave Roussy and Lyon Bérard, for 30 patients which had identical head and neck tumor. And we asked the 2 centers to identify where is the tumor. Okay, so the job of the physicians was to identify the tumor volume. According to your opinion, what was the average consensus between the 2 centers for the same patients? So this is the same patients, and you have 2 physicians looking into the same case. And then you are measuring how they disagree or how they agree. What was the average consensus according to you? Give me a number. No, it was 57%. That means when you are looking into the volume of the tumor, the two centers on the same patient, in average, they had an agreement of 57%. But that's not that bad. Now, the real question is, for how many patients there was zero overlap, according to you? That means that if the patient has been treated at Gustavrusi, you will have taken out something. And if the same patient was treated at Lyon-Bérard, you have taken out something very different. 0%. Any other guesses? 20%. Out of the 30 patients, 6 of them, between the two centers, they had zero overlap. And this is something we published. That means that either none of them is right, either one of them is right, but it means that if the patient was treated in one center or another center, the outcomes would have been very different because you are not treating at all the same thing. So being able to standardize, automatize, and bring these solutions to the clinical workflow makes a big difference because now we are using real ground truth and we're able to get at 75%. My point is that physicians are not perfect, humans are not perfect, and there is a huge variability. And these two centers are among the most well-known in France and in Europe. Imagine if you go to a smaller private center where a physician is doing everything, because the teams that have looked into this data, there were teams that actually they were only doing on head and neck tumors. So they were already specialized. Despite being specialized, almost 60% agreement, 20% of the patients, 6 patients out of 30 with zero consensus. That gives you an idea where we are. Any questions on this topic? No question. Okay, good. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the second part of the work that we'll present. This is the work that actually has been done by Alexandre Cafaro. He's also a PhD student at Gustave Roussy, Lyon-Bérard, and Paris-Saclay. He has worked on a different problem, and he's going to defend his thesis in 2 weeks from now. The idea of Alexandre Cafaro was to actually to push the notion of actually image interpretation by being able to generate things that we are not seeing. So that's the part of the talk, seeing the visible. Okay. How typically we treat patients in cancer? I mean, we have a machine which is called the linear accelerator. This linear accelerator is rotating around the patient. It stops, it irradiates, and then goes on. So it's like you are sitting with a gun. So instead of using a gun, you are using rays. So, okay. Of course, when you are shooting a ray, actually it will kill everything that it goes through. It will not kill only the tumor. The ray will kill all the tissues that before the tumor, and they will kill all the tissues that after the tumor. It's a ray. It's like, you're sitting with a bug. The way we implement that is when we treat a patient, we like to be able to guide the way this treatment is delivered real time. So what we do is we're preserving what we call organs at risk. If you have a tumor on head and neck, you want to be sure, for example, that you're not going to irradiate the optic nerve, because if you do that, then even if you treat the tumor, the person will not be able to see anymore. So it's not only a question of targeting precisely the tumor, but it's even a bigger question of how you can guarantee that when you target the tumor, you are not actually destroying tissues that are very critical. And this is the case, for example, for breast cancer. When you're irradiating the breast, you have to be careful that you don't over-irradiate the heart, because then the person, even if it's treated for breast cancer, is going to have lifelong cardiac problems. So the way this guidance is done is by having a system which actually in real time is getting images of the patient. And the images the system is getting are 2 projections. So you have 2 panels that actually creating a 2 projection image on real time on the position of the patient. And that's what you would like to align with respect to what you are delivering. So there is a live acquisition of imaging during the treatment. This is a workflow here. So you have the CT scanner, you have a reconstruction, and then you go to the patient. And when you're in the patient, you're actually having these deep planar X-rays and you are irradiating. And then what you have to be careful is that you do not over-irradiate things that are very critical. What is the problem with that? Actually, a deep planar X-ray is what you are seeing there. These are just projections of a signal that goes through the panels. There is not much you can understand other than seeing bone structures, because bones are the ones that actually absorb most of the energy. So the physicians, they have to decide for head and neck tumors whether the dose is delivered properly by only looking on these 2 images. On these 2 images, you have absolutely zero information about the tissue, and you have absolutely zero information about where the tumor is. But this is the only thing we have. And there is no way you can augment the number of projections because there is no place in the room. That means there is no way you can do lifetime 3D imaging because the only thing you can do is you can have these biplanar X-rays on the wall, and this is what you're observing. So now the question is, if I have as input only these two images, is there a way actually I can reconstruct something that will look most likely very close to what the patient anatomy looks like so I can have a more informed decision about the guidance? This was the PhD about. The idea was to train a network again, very, very standard things, which actually will try to generate from 2D projections a complete 3D scan. Okay. The first thing you need to do is you need to build a generator. A bad generator is something that is able to synthesize data. There is very, very, very much discussion about deepfake today. Deepfake is a generator. I mean, you have a system. If you are using ChatGPT or DAL, you can go there. You can create me an image of whatever you like. This is a generator. So what we did is we used almost 10,000 scans. These are patients that have been treated. These are real data. For these 10,000 scans, what actually we train a model that is able to synthesize an infinite number of scans. Okay, so you are pushing your data to your model. The model is learning how your data is distributed, is compacting them by creating what we call a latent space. And then by adding noise to the latent space, you are able to synthesize, in theory, any virtual anatomy. So the first part of the work is what you are seeing here is actually a 3D generator, which can create an ultimate number of virtual scans by simply adding noise on the latent space. Now, if we look into what we're observing, the best solution will actually to use a generator in such a way that when I compare the synthetic projections of this generator with what I'm observing, they are as close as we can. So the idea is that to figure out a way of optimizing the distance between the 3D construction that the generator is producing with the 2D projections. This is actually what we did. So the first thing is we used real data to create a cohort. Once we have the real data, we're creating a cohort to have correspondences between 2D projections and the 3D data. And then we train the model that minimizes doing a gradient descent on the latent space, that at the end we're getting projections that are very close to what we're observing. If you are not scared, this is a typical architecture. So you have a spatial transformer network that allows you to align in between 3D and 2D. You have a 3D generator, which synthesizes an ultimate number of 3D scans. And then you have the projections. And the only thing you would like to do is you would like to minimize the distance between the projections and the generation by imposing constraints coming from the ground truth. And all these things are trained to happen. I mean, there is no optimization. The system is trained to take as input the 2D projections and generate the 3D scan. So this is a complete architecture. You shouldn't be scared. So as I said, again, there are 3 layers. There is a first layer that is trying to map the patient anatomy to the observations. There is a second layer which takes into account how anatomy is changing. And there is a third layer which tries to generate a 3D volume such that the 2D projections that are synthesized from the 3D volume correspond to the observations. Okay. So this model we trained with using about 500 patients for which we had projections, 3D scans, and follow-ups. The training takes about 6 weeks on a heavy cluster, and then the inference is about 40 seconds. So if you do that, these are the results we are getting. Okay, so on the first row is actually the ground truth. On the last row is on the first row is actually the mapping of the plan XD to the ground truth. The last one is what we should generate, and the one before the last is what we are synthesizing. So what you have to compare is the 2 last columns. The only difference is that we don't have access to the 3D, we only have access to the second row. That means that we're able to get from a single projection to something that is going to be a complete 3D reconstruction on all these volumes. The results are not that perfect. That means we can still see differences, but now physicians can actually see exactly what is happening during the treatment because they can understand how tissue behaves which was not the case before when looking into bones. Of course, Alexander did a number of validations to verify that this is working. This is the signal to noise ratio. I mean, the first thing you can do is back projection, which is very bad, going from 2D to 3D. And eventually, when you are publishing a paper, you always show that your method is better than everybody else, because otherwise your paper will not accept it. That's what Alexander did. This was published in MICAI this year. We have pushed this idea even further, and instead of using what we call a generative adversarial neural network, what we used is something which is even more powerful now, which is called diffusion models, latent diffusion models. Latent diffusion models are ways of synthesizing signal from noise. This is a state-of-the-art technology today on any synthesization problem. So here, the method remains the same, but the only thing that is changing is the way we generate synthesized data. And what you are seeing is actually you can go from noise to almost a signal. Now the results look like that. So again, on the left-hand side, you have the input signal. This is the real 3D volume. And on the right-hand side is what you can predict by only using these two projections. Again, there is no way you can match perfectly the quality of the image, but now we are getting something that is very close to clinical reality. And this is very useful for the physicians to make an assessment. And this works for brain. It works also for lungs and breast. And it's fully automatic. There is no possibility for any human to solve these inverse problems using this limited amount of projections and data and get its reconstruction. Okay? Let's move on. I'm going to talk to you about another problem I've been working, and again, it's the same idea. The idea is to be able to synthesize different modalities from one modality. So this is what we call a universal scanner. So this is something that the objective is to be able to generate a CT scan from an MR scan. So instead of having two scanners, what you would like to do is you would like to be able to learn a transformation, which will be able to go from an MR to the CT. And the reason why you would like to do that is because MR has both anatomical and physiological information. CT scan is only about anatomy. So again, we built what we call a cycle gun. Cycle gun consists of learning a bidirectional transformation that takes you from one modality to another. We use several thousand of cases for training. And if you do that, then you are getting this kind of results. So what you are seeing on the, if I can play the video, what you are seeing on the right-hand side is something that does exist. What you are seeing on the left-hand side is something completely artificial. That means it was never acquired. Actually, it's a generation of a CT scan from the MR. So this is, again, it's fully automatic, and it's actually, there is no actual acquisition on the CT scan. We can go even further. I mean, you can use the same technology for, oops, I went too fast. We can use the same technology for any anatomy. We did a clinical study to demonstrate the interest of this technology. So this is something that was published last year in the field of oncology. We demonstrated that by using synthetic CT scan, you can actually do as well as by using a real CT scan. So there is no absolute need for a CT scan. Let's try to talk about the future. So this is work that we have been starting doing with Gustave Roussy and Pitié-Salpêtrière. This is a clinical trial. Okay, this is about glioblastoma tumors. Glioblastoma tumors are the only tumors today that there is no progress of life expectancy for the last 30 years. Back in the 90s, it was 14 months. Today, it's also 14 months. So the idea of this clinical trial is actually the reason why brain tumors are very, very hard to treat and very complex to treat is because the surrounding area is very complex, right? So you have to be very careful. So the idea of the clinical trial is to use machine learning and try actually to separate tumor in 4 categories. The first one is what we call a necrosis. That means that the cells are already dead and there is no reason to treat them. The second is the enhancing tumor, which is the most aggressive part. And then you have to worry about less worry about the non-enhancing. And then you have to worry about what we call end-domain invasion, because this is where tumor is diffusing on the brain. So the idea of the clinical trial is to be able to go from a CT scan to this categorization, and then use this categorization to actually change the way we treat patients by focusing on the parts of the brain where the tumor is more aggressive. There are going to be 30 patients that will be treated. This is a real clinical trial starting hopefully beginning of next year. And we hope that by doing that, you're going to be able to better treat the patients because you're focusing the treatment on areas where you know that the tumor is more aggressive, which means that you can reduce the overall dose distribution while becoming more efficient. We don't know how the clinical trial will be. If I want to move further, I have to go until 10:30. How much time? 5, 10 minutes?
7 minutes.
7 minutes. Okay. I'm going to talk about the work that Quentin Spinan is doing. So this is a very different problem. Actually, here, what we like to do is we like to reverse the time. That means that we have patients that have been diagnosed with what we call multiple sclerosis. I'm going to give you the results, then I will come back. Multiple sclerosis is a chronic disease of the brain, and this is what you are seeing on the upper left part of the slide. And actually, this multiple sclerosis have two components. This is what we call the chronic component. That means that it evolves slowly. And then we have the acute component, which that means that there are instantaneous attacks on the brain that will create lesions. And in multiple sclerosis, what does matter is not the chronic part, because there's not much you can do. What does matter is the acute. So the work of Quentin was actually to identify among these multiple sclerosis lesions, which are part of the chronic volume and which are part of the acute. You can do that very easily if you had an acquisition before the disease starts. However, when you make a diagnosis, it's already too late and you don't have a scan of the patient before the disease. So his work actually consisted of saying, is there a way of synthesizing how the brain of this patient will look like by training models that will remove the lesion and will replace it with healthy tissue? What we did again is we use the same principle as before. We built a generator of healthy brains. This generator of healthy brains was trained using real and fake data to be sure that actually it does a job. And then once we had a new case, we look on the non-infected part of the brain, which volume of the generator was giving us the closest match to what we're observing. And you were replacing all the disease tissue by taking the healthy tissue for this generator. The results look like that. I will play you a video if I can be successful. So this is a healthy brain, and you can see the difference of it. Again, when you are looking into a diseased brain, it's full of lesions, and now you are able to replace them by actually synthesizing things that you don't see, so you are reversing the time. This is another example. Again, there is a lot of data. We use something like 10,000 patients, which we had MRs. These were healthy patients, and then we used something like 3,000 patients for which we had MRs on multiple sclerosis, and that's how the train model. Since I have 5 minutes left, I will not show.
I made a mistake. We have more. You can take 10 more minutes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to just show you another example, which actually this is work that is most based on convolutional neural networks. The idea here is to be able to build a digital twin of the patient. So what you would like to do is you would like to push a CT scan, and then you would like to be able to get, if possible, if I can play the video. There's no video. Okay, I cannot play the video. Yeah. So I mean, the idea was to be able to get a 3D volume of the patient where you have all the structures. The video is not playing, but that's not the problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the performance. If human has to do that, it takes 3 hours, because the human has to go slice by slice, and then on every slice, identify every structure, annotate every structure in forward. If you are using different solutions, you can actually reduce the time by almost a factor of 95%. That's not important. I will skip that, and then I will go to the last part, which is the most interesting. So this is again I'll go along the line of seeing the visible. Roger San was a PhD student at Gustave Roussy. He's a physician by training. He's not a mathematician. His objective was the following. Today, lung cancer is one of the most challenging ones, because we don't have treatment, and almost 50% of the patients that will not survive. And the only treatment today that does fantastic job, other than surgery, which is possible when you're in an early stage, is what we call targeted therapies, and in particular immunotherapy. So immunotherapy consists of using your own antibody system, modifying it, and using this modification to go after the tumor cells. So it's your own modification of your antibodies to actually destroy the tumor. The problem is that immunotherapy is very expensive. It costs about 100,000 to 150,000 per year per patient. But that's okay. We are in France, so we don't have to worry about that, because Social Security is taking charge of that. The second problem is actually immunotherapy is only working for 1 out of 5 patients. That means that even the 5 patients that are eligible, for some reason, when you administer the treatment, only one of them will respond. So that means that you have to treat 5 patients, which all of them need the treatment, and you will expect to see one responder. But that's okay. So the treatment cost is not 100,000 anymore, it's now 500,000 because you have to treat 4 to get one treated. But the most challenging part is that out of this remaining 4 patients, one will deteriorate. That means that immunotherapy has the opposite effect. I mean, instead of improving the response to the treatment, actually it will, to some extent, aggravate the way the patient responds. So there is a real need on understanding why different patients with the same tumor, with the same biology, respond differently to the treatment. So the PhD of Roger San, which was published in Lancet 4 years ago, the idea was, is there a way of actually interpreting data such that I can understand why some of the patients are responding and some of the patients are not responding? So what Roger did is actually he used CT scans. On these CT scans, we identify the tumor volume. And then on this tumor volume, we extract what we call statistics. So we look into the tumor size, we look into the tumor length, maximum diameter. We look into first order, second order statistics, third order statistics. So we built a feature vector, which was about 500 variables coming from the CT scan. And on these 500 variables, the objective was to identify which variables could help us to identify why some of the patients are responding and some of the patients are not responding. So here, then he used something very, very simple, which is called logistic regression. But what we are seeing when we are doing that is actually we are able to go from 20% responders to almost 65% responders. That means that if this tool was available and was used to identify which patients are likely to respond, and we have used this tool to treat the patients, the response rate would have gone up to 60%. That means that we're able to identify on the image information that allows us to actually phenotype the disease. And this phenotypication of the disease is helping us to characterize and determine which patients respond and which patients do not respond. And this is a huge step forward. Of course, this was a small cohort, about 300 patients, so there is no way you can extrapolate the results. If you would like to push that to a clinical workflow, you need to do the same study with several hundreds of thousands of patients. And what you are seeing here is what we call life expectancy. There are 2 populations. There's the high population, is the black population is what the solution has identified as potential responders. And you can see that actually the percentage of people living longer is much higher. And the red population is a population that was corresponding to the system prediction that most likely these patients will not respond. Of course, you can see a clear separation between the 2 populations. So this indicates that there is information on the clinical file of the patient. There is information on the imaging that will help us to identify. There's going to be another clinical trial, prospective clinical trial using these components. This is combined radiotherapy and immunotherapy. We're going to have again Gustave Roussy and Leon Berard. There are going to be 900 patients that will be treated. 300 will be treated with the standard of care. 300 will be treated with modification, slight modification of the standard of care, and 300 will be treated with this system, where the idea is to show that we're able to improve outcomes and we're able to improve survival. To conclude, machine learning and AI is going to transform healthcare. Whether we like it or not, it's going to happen. Now, the question is how and when. However, there are a number of challenges. The first challenge is standardization. Every hospital, when you discuss with the hospital, they believe that they are the best. And every hospital is doing different things. So it's really hard to train a model if you have data where every hospital is convinced that they're doing the right thing. But that's okay. The real problem is that when you go inside to the same hospital, every physician is doing different things. So you have a situation where there is no standardization of data, and there is no solution to, I mean, even if you use the most efficient, the most complex machine learning solution, if I take the example of head and neck tumors, and on the same patient, somebody's telling that the tumor is here, and another hospital, the tumor is telling you the tumor is somewhere different, there is no way you can train any system. So we need to standardize practices. This is very important. The second thing that is very important in healthcare, that means if you make a wrong prediction on, ad advertisement or, buying a product, nobody cares. These models are what we call high-dimensional models with thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of variables, or even hundreds of millions of variables. So, and in healthcare, you're never going to have enough data to well condition the way you solve the problem. That means that you are getting something that for sure is not a global optimum. It's a local optimum solution of what you're looking for. Now the question is how you can differentiate what is a random correlation with what is causality. In healthcare, what you are looking is you're not looking for just connecting information because there are a number of random correlations. You like to impose causality. And this is something that today none of the systems is looking to. That means biology is absent, physiology is absent. We just treat the problem as a data problem. And when you look into data, there might be things that appear to be related, but they're just random correlations with no causality. The last thing which is very important is what we call bias and generalization. When you are writing a paper, your objective is to fit the top of the iceberg. You look at the literature, you see what were the best results that were published, and then it's a question of defining a method and finding a data set where you do as well. That's a paper. And that's what we did in Lancet. In Lancet, which is the highest impact factor publication I did in my life, compared to computer science and mathematics, you just show that you do as well on 300 patients. When you like that to take it in the real life, instead of just fitting your model to the top of the iceberg, you have to fit your model to the visible part of the iceberg, which you can see the difference. So it's much harder. But the reality is that in real life, in a real hospital with real patients, what you are seeing is less than 20% of the clinical diversity, physiology, diversity and everything. So you have to be sure that you are developing solutions that they scale, they are not biased, and they are able to address the entire population. How this can happen? First of all, I think something that we are not doing in Europe and we're doing very well in US, there is a concept of think big or go home. If you want to have an impact, it's great that you can improve a part of the workflow, a small part of the workflow, but at the end, what we know in mathematics is that the optimal solutions of sub-problems do not correspond to the optimal solution of the entire problem. So instead of trying to solve individual components which have an influence to the whole thing, it's better to try to solve the whole problem, even if your solution is not the optimal for every sub-problem, because at the end, you're trying to solve the entire problem and not sub-parts. The second thing which is important and none of us is doing very well is actually talking to physicians, understanding the workflow, understanding the biology. Mathematicians at computer science are very proud of what they are doing. So they say, give me your data set, don't care. Don't worry, I know everything. I don't need you anymore. That's not how it works, especially in healthcare. You need to understand where the information comes from. You need to understand the constraints. You need to take into account whatever practice is used. So introducing domain knowledge on these models will radically change both the performance, the generalization, and the acceptability from physicians. Data. We went from something that was big data 10 years ago to something that today is good data. We don't need a lot of data. We need to have good quality data. We need to have high quality, curated data sets, complete data sets, where you don't spend your time, inputting variables, putting random variables because you don't have them, because none of these models will work well unless you have good data. And the last thing, which is very important, is that every problem is different. Depending on your input sample, depending on the number of samples on your training data set, depending on the objective, you need to have a critical thinking on what is the right method for the right problem. And today we have the tendency on looking only to one class of methods, which is not a good thing, especially when in healthcare, depending on the problem you are trying to solve, you can go from 100 cases data set to maximum 10, 50,000, which is not the case in other domains. You can go up to 100 or even to million. So understanding the domain, try to solve the big picture, have good quality data, and talk to the physicians is what we need to be successful. And by saying that, I would like to thank you for your attention. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much. Questions?
I would have a question about, I would say, possible bias and where you acquire your data, science, here with the oncological, for example, picture, where you have to go in the hospital, which in French is not too expensive, but in USA, it's, if I understand well, it can be very expensive. So is it possible to have a bias on the data from the economical origin?
So that's a great question. Yeah, I will repeat the question for the people online. The question was about bias, especially when you have to collect data, both from Europe and other continents, especially in the US, where the cost is not going to be the same. So when you are building models, how you can guarantee that the data we have used for training is good enough so this bias does not appear on the solutions? That was the question. I mean, the bias can come from two things. The first one is the machine you're using. So for example, you have different vendors, and every machine has different characteristics. So if, for example, you are only using data to train your model for a single vendor, then you're going to have a bias, which actually will work very well on this vendor and it will not work on other vendors. That's the first bias. And the second bias can come from the anatomy itself, distribution of anatomy. That means that, for example, in the United States, that the level of obesity is higher compared to Europe. And we know that in Asia, the level of obesity is lower compared to Europe. So when you are actually building your cohort, means the first thing you have to do is you have to guarantee that in terms of vendor, in terms of acquisition of the signal, you don't have a bias. So usually you try to demonstrate that the number of samples you got from different machines correspond to the deployment on the hospital. So that's easy because you just look on the vendor. When you are actually trying to test the product, then you have to guarantee that when you are testing a product, that the percentage of the test that comes from the different areas correspond to the clinical reality. So today, if you have to deploy something in the United States, the FDA, which is the Federal Drug Administration, will ask you to demonstrate that 50% of your test cases, they come from US. So this is part of the flow. That means you have to guarantee, there is no way you can build a product if you don't have a representative. There is no way you can solve the problem if you don't have a representative data set. So this is thing that you have to do anyway. And I mean, I agree with you that the cost in US is higher, but also the potential of market in US is higher. So you do invest because you will expect that the investor return is going to be higher, but there is no way you can certify a product unless you are demonstrating that you are actually taking into account the deployment of the vendors as well as the anatomy of the different patients. And this is something that everybody's doing.
But just a general question, somebody presented your tools for the physicians or in the hospitals. What are the feedback do you get when you present the pipeline with numbers? I wonder if there are some people might use develops or.
Yeah. So I think there is a shift. I will ask the question. I will repeat the question. So the question is, what is the feedback or what is the appreciation of physicians when they see this kind of tools coming to the hospital and the clinical workflow? I think we're observing a shift. The problem is that if we look on the past 10 years, I think in general, machine learning and AI have overpromised things. And we're still doing that. We're still saying that we're going to do everything, which I think it's okay in a number of domains because people forget. But in hospitals, it's not like that. I mean, people, once they have spent time to integrate something on their workflow, because physicians, they don't like changes. They don't. I mean, once they are used with something, even if it's bad or whatever, they are used to it. So when they spend effort on integrating something new, and then they realize that actually the promise is not there, then they give up. So they will never do it again, or it's going to be really hard. So when we look at the very beginning, which goes back to 2019, 2018, I mean, there is the old generation of physicians where they were saying, yeah, man, I don't believe you. Anyway, this thing will not work. And people sold to me that before. And then there's a new generation of physicians where they try to see the value. So if your product is doing the job, then people are willing to test it. But what is even more important is not actually that the product is doing the job. What is more important is actually the product is well integrated on the workflow. So they will prefer a solution that is not fantastic, but is good enough, that they don't have to change their practices, than a fantastic solution where they have to do from scratch. So today there is more and more consensus that at least for some of the problems, AI will replace humans that today are doing labor, non-intelligent stuff. Today, a physician for a patient in radiotherapy in cancer will spend 2 to 3 hours just looking on CT scans and putting points. These 3 hours could be used to actually talking to the patient and they're explaining what is the treatment about, what are the risks and all these things. So I think we are moving toward a new generation of physicians that today are trained, and also means that there are concrete applications where we show that we can do things. So I think these are things, but we still have to pay attention to not overpromise things, because at some point, this overpromise will fight back, and then we'll end up in a situation where people will not believe us. Yes. Yes.
Just a general comment first, and then a question. Based on the thing that you mentioned for physicians, I would say that for doctors in hospital, that everybody thinks that their hospital is the best, etc. I would say that the same applies for algorithms and people who develop models. Or everybody thinks that their model is the best.
At least that's what they do when they publish it. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So my question is following this. So it's a bit technical. So you mentioned this very nice model that takes phenotypic data from the tumor, and basically mainly from image of the tumor only, and you extract all these nice features and you train the model. Have you tried, or do you know any other studies that trying to introduce some biology to that? Maybe if they overexpose that to some RNA-seq data,
yes,
genomics data, or any other kind of.
Sure. I will repeat the question first. I will repeat the comment also that mathematicians and computer science are like physicians. They do believe that whatever they do is the best. That was a comment. The question is, when looking to the model, you're talking about predicting immunotherapy outcomes. It was mostly based on imaging. Whether other studies have integrated additional biology or any other cues that could have used for treatment. There is a number of papers that have been published afterwards. People added, gene expression. People added, blood, liquid biopsy. So there is an ongoing work on actually enhancing the models. I think today the main concern that none of these models is used on the clinical workflow. So it's good to publish papers on high impact factors, but when you have to push it to the clinical workflow, you have to be sure that data can be reproduced. You have to be used that data is available. But there is, today the trend is towards multimodality. So the more, that means every modality will give you part of the picture, but being able to combine imaging, which gives you a macro, with biology, which gives you something else, with gene expression, which gives you something else, usually helps you to better phenotype. So there are a number of papers that did that, and the results, they improve slightly, but we are still not, in order to be able to build something that will be used in the hospital, you need to reach something like 95% area under the curve. So today we're at 80, we're still far away.
Can I have a little follow-up? To what extent they are interpretable?
Yeah, it depends on the dimension of the model. When you're looking into conventional machine learning, usually these things that you can try to interpret them because you have variables, and especially unless you are doing nonlinear stuff, you can associate with what you know. When you're looking into deep learning methods, usually people, they tend to introduce attention mechanisms, which helps you to understand where the signal hits up, which works very well on imaging, but it doesn't work on other domains. So today there is a lot of discussion, and the question was about interpretability of this model, about what we call about fairness, explainable AI. My own thoughts is that the models are getting bigger, and I think this is something that is just a question of discussion. I don't think that we're never going to be able to interpret and understand these models. Now the real question is that if as a patient you have the option of choosing a physician which will do 80%. But once he failed, he's going to be able to tell you, understand why I failed. Or you will choose an algorithm that will do 95%, but when it fails, it doesn't know why it failed. So that's going to be the question. But today, we're not there yet because still these models are not powerful enough. Last question, right? Go ahead.
On the first represented work, using a cyclogram to generate the virtual
histology. Yeah.
Because cyclogram has been widely used for size generation, but in this application, the virtual image looks like the real image is not enough. So sometimes some very detailed info or some very small targets on the RSI can be very important for conducting the analysis. So how to make sure this the similarity on the main structure can be very, very similar, but how to verify the theoretic images can be there.
Okay, I will try to repeat the question. So the question was about the virtual biopsy, where you try to synthesize from a CT scan digital pathology slices, and The question was about the technology of cycle gun, which actually tries to globally align the signal, but there are specific details on the signal that are more important than others. So the question is how you can guarantee that whatever is important is preserved. Is this correct? Yeah, so actually that's a very good question. It's a very tough question. Usually what you are doing is, this is by changing your loss, you're looking at what we call weight losses. So if you know that there is an area where the tumor is, what you can do is you can actually increase the importance of the reconstruction on this area. And that's what we did. So we use the mask of the physicians that they define where the tumor is. And then we say that on this area, we'll expect that the quality of the signal is going to be as good as possible. And then the weight is different when you're going far away. But there is not much you can do. Either you put weighted losses, or you put masks, or you put attention mechanism. But the only way is to actually modify your loss function to take into account what is important to reconstruct and what is less important.
Okay, so let's thank Nikos once again. Thank you very much for the